Hi, and welcome to the studio. My name is Thomas Vandenberg. I'm the creator of Vermillion, and together we're going to be painting this Bob Ross style painting in Vermillion to help you get started. Ready? Let's get going. Before we begin, let's take a quick look at the settings. Here in the painting settings, you have the canvas mixing sensitivity, and make sure it's at the default. Same for the paint thickness. We'll be making a new canvas, and the size that Bob always uses is 24 by 18 inches, either landscape or portrait, which you can change using the corner piece here. But for this painting, we're going to be using a landscape one. So the first thing we're going to be doing is covering our canvas in liquid white, and liquid white is nothing more than paint thinner and white. So just take a brush here, mix up on the palette, and then we cover the entire canvas. And to save us some time, just use a canvas scaler and block in the entire canvas in just a few strokes. There. Now the canvas is primed and ready to go. And we did this for making some interesting sky effects. You'll see now, when we add some blue, the potato blue, the classic color Bob always uses, that as we apply it to the canvas, it automatically starts to mix with the white we just put down. So we'll get some interesting sky effects for free, without having to vary our colors manually so much. So let's fill it up to about halfway, and then just with a clean brush go across with little crisscross strokes to blend out the sky a little bit more. Just blend it all together. Add a little bit more darker paint here in the corner to get a little bit of a vignetting effect. Same here on the other side. There. That's our sky base color just about done. And next we're going to be adding a couple of clouds. For this, we're going to be using, first of all, the 1-inch oval brush, the smooth variant, which is right here next to the 2-inch brush. And we just load up a bit of white paint, and then just make a big old cloud shape. Same on the other side. There. And now, with a dry, smooth fan brush, we can blend these clouds a little bit with the sky. So just go across and blend these shapes into the sky. And you'll see how easily we can now get a very smooth effect without a lot of effort required from us. Just take this brush across and blend out these clouds. If there's any thick paint on there which you don't want, just use a brush to flatten it down. There. Those are some nice looking clouds already. Another brush which is very useful for these clouds is the 1-inch blender brush. It's this one right here. and you can use it to fluff up the clouds, as Bob will call it. So unlike the other brushes, which will do sort of blending with the colors around it, this one will move the colors. So you can very easily move shapes out of these clouds. And then no matter what shape you started with when you initially put down the white paint, you can just use this brush to move it all around and get some really nice fluffy shapes. With oil painting, nothing is ever fixed. You can always move the paint around on the canvas using this brush or a couple of the other ones which you have available on the rack. So never mind too much that the initial shape you put down isn't perfect. It's always about pushing and pulling the paint around. But these are some lovely clouds, I would say. Isn't that amazing? Like, with just a few minutes, you already have this beautiful sky on the canvas, and it took us absolutely no effort. Okay, so that's that done. The next part is going to be the water. And we'll reach for a 2-inch brush again. Make sure it's clean. And we'll be mixing a little bit of the phthalo green with the phthalo blue. So these two first colors on your palette right here. So we get this sort of color. And then with a pretty light paint load, we're just going to be pulling it in from the side. And just making horizontal strokes here. So I'm leaving a gap here in the middle, which is a thing that Bob always does for making like a bright specular highlight in the middle of the lake. But because we covered the entire canvas with paint in the first step, you'll see if I start going across, it will mix with everything. And that's not really what we're intending. So to make our highlight as bright as possible, we can use the rag and then just dip it here into the paint bucket and make a gap here in the center. And now if you go back and take the 2-inch brush, we can make this nice bright highlight here in the center. And just really go wild with it if you want to. Try to stay as horizontal as possible though. Don't worry too much about the rest of the water because we will be covering it all up with the foreground in just a minute. Just add a few highlights maybe here and there, but it will all be covered up soon enough. So now the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for is going to be the mountains, for which we use the palette knife. So for the mountains, we're going to be mixing up a decent color first. So let's take our palette here and take a bit of the black and some white and make a nice gray, maybe a bit darker. And I'm also going to be adding in a bit of the darker, the Prussian blue here, because we want our mountain to really sit in the background. And because of the atmospheric haze, the furthest away something is, the more blue it will become. So with a bit of a blue tinge, our mountain will appear farther in the background. Okay, so let's put down this mountain here. Just using plenty of paint. And you'll see that the thick paint will be put down. And you'll be flattening it down in a minute because we don't want this paint to be so thick at this stage. So with a clean knife, using either the button or the little rag here, we will now be pushing down the thick paint on the canvas, just to flatten everything nice and smooth, so that we can easily go across it in the next stage. Let's make sure that the mountain comes all the way down to the horizon. There. Okay, so the next phase will be the snow. And for the snow, we can use a neat trick that Bob always does. It's using the edge of the palette knife to make a stipple pattern. So if we take some white here and mixing a little bit of the blue, this will be the blue, the snow for our brighter side, and we also need the shadow side. So maybe something like this. So take a look at these two colors next to each other, because this is how they're going to be on the mountain, a bright side and a shadow side. Let's start with the brighter side first. And don't use pure white, at least not all of it, because it might be too vibrant. But now, using the edge of the knife, we can put down this nice stipple pattern. And just when you're doing this, always remember that one side will be the light side and the other side will be the shadow side. So let's just take these edges here. If you make a mistake, just hit undo. You don't need to cover the entire thing, just you can leave a little bit of the color of the mountain as well. There, that's the bright side done. Now let's also put in the shadow side here. Remember that the more you tilt the knife, the more stippled the pattern becomes. So you can really use this to easily vary how much paint you're putting down. If at any point you find the paint is too thick, you can either flatten it down or use the settings to change the paint thickness. But we'll be coming to that in a minute. Let's just fill in the shadow sides here and make our mountains a bit more three-dimensional. Just follow the shape of the mountain with a little bit of variation. You see how I've introduced a bit of a zigzag here in this mountain shape just to make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, don't worry too much about the sides here, we'll be covering up those in a minute. But that's already a pretty good looking mountain range. And again, it was really easy to do, wasn't it? Let's take our 2-inch brush and sort of settle these mountains down here with the waterline. Just use gentle touches, because you see the 2-inch brush deforms when you press it against the canvas. If you use gentle pressure, you get this bristly pattern. If you push down hard, it becomes fully smooth. So let's just sort of fade it in here and at the bottom. So we have a little bit of a darker waterline in here. And we can also use a blender brush to sort of smooth things out. Make it a little bit foggy at the bottom. There, it looks just about right, doesn't it? The next step will be another classic Bob move, and that's going to be a distant tree line. Little pine trees all the way in the back at the foot of the mountains. And we're going to be using our bristle fan brush here, so you can use the joystick to swap the fan brush if necessary. You can always use the brush scaling as well if necessary. And we're going to be loading just some black paint here, maybe with a hint of blue for the further trees. There. And now just grip the brush all the way at the front and start stabbing away. And you'll see now that the paint is mixing with what's there, which in this case we don't really want. We want to be able to easily paint our trees over top of what's there. So if you go into the settings again and you lower the canvas mixing sensitivity, you'll find that now it's a lot easier to paint across, and we can easily put down these trees. So just put them down. You can vary them a little bit in how high or how low you put them, or how large a brush you're using, but just take about the center of the canvas here and put down this row of trees in the back. We don't need to go too far to the sides because you'll be covering the sides of the foreground in a second. There. That's the first row done. And for the second row, let's choose pure black with a fully loaded brush and just add in a second row of trees over top. A couple of them can be maybe a little bit taller, maybe not too tall, like this. There. Now let's make sure that it also comes low enough, because for the next step we'll again be working a little bit of magic with a 2-inch brush. So let's make sure the 2-inch brush is fully clean, and then grip it so we have it horizontally, and then gently pull down vertically to pull down these reflections. Here in the center, we may need to add a little bit of paint ourselves. There. And now gently move the 2-inch brush across to add a couple of lines. There. Now to fade out the reflections, we're going to be using the blender brush again. And just take it vertically, either downwards or upwards. And just really fade this reflection in there. Try not to move around the reflection in the center too much. Just take care where you're making your brush strokes. There. And now for the final touch, and you're gonna love this, a really good tip. Take the 1-inch filbert brush, which is right here on the top left. Make sure it's clean, and then just take it across. And you'll see how now we're creating a very detailed reflection by just making a few small strokes. It's that easy. It really is. Doesn't that look splendid? I think so. Let's take our palette knife again and add in a final detail. Just little water lines to mark where the shoreline is going to be. So with a clean knife, you can use the edge to scratch away at the canvas a little bit. Don't overdo it. Don't go too wild here, but make a few small lines. And it's pressure sensitive, so if you're using a light touch, you will only be removing a little bit of paint. If you're really hammering it in, you'll be scraping away at the canvas. Okay. So we're still looking pretty good so far, right? We have our mountains, we have our background trees. All that remains to do now is the entire foreground. And for this, we're going to be doing a classic Bob move. Still with our canvas masking sensitivity at 0. And we're going to be using our smooth fan brush, fully loaded with black paint, and we'll be putting down 2 big old pine trees. Classic move at this stage of the painting. So let's put the first one here, and the second one right next to it. Like so. Then using the bristle fan brush, you're just going to be making a couple of back and forth marks here. Just back and forth, to mark down where our pine tree is going to be. There, that looks just about right. Now we'll be tapping in a couple of grasses, maybe using our 1-inch oval again, putting in black paint in there, and just tapping it here over the side, making sure we don't cover up our reflection in the center. There. And using the canvas scaler, we can save ourselves some time by just filling in the rest. There. That's our entire foreground done on this side, ready for some color. But before we add the color, let's do the other side first as well. So on this side, let's again take the smooth fan brush. Oh. There. And put in another tree here. One here and a smaller one here. And we'll take our 1-inch filbert brush again to make some leafy trees this time. So just tap in here. And at this point, it could be a good call to lower your paint thickness, because we don't want these trees, these leaves, to be fully dripping with paint just yet. We want them to be pretty flat. So by lowering the paint thickness, the paint we will be outputting is going to be flatter. And just make sure you're leaving some space here for our sky in the background. There, and it's also just using the same brush. Making the outline for our little islands here on the side. There, and maybe using a bigger brush and a smaller canvas to fill it all in. There. There, that's the base coat done of our foreground trees. All that's left to do now on this painting is tapping in the color for the foreground. And before we do that, let's take our painting settings again and put them back to the default. Because in this case, we want our color to pick up what's there. So if we start with our sap green here on the bristle fan brush, and go over these sides, you'll see how it starts to pick up the dark and we get a natural gradient as we come down the tree. Let's use a slightly darker color on the other side. There. And I've also started using the smooth fan brush. Maybe the results here are a little bit better. Okay, let's also do the same thing on this tree. Using our smooth fan brush, our sap green, just going over these black areas and having the darker paint pick up by itself. And then taking a slightly darker mix for the other side of the tree, because that's going to be the shaded side. There. Let's touch up the center parts here a little bit. Okay, that's looking good. Now, with our 1-inch filbert, we're going to be tapping in a couple of bushes and grasses down here at the bottom. So let's clear this palette again. Maybe take some brown and some green right here. And tap here at the bottom. And when you're doing this, make sure you leave enough room for the black as well. So before we put crosses across the entire thing, let's put a path here as well. Back to our palette knife, let's mix up some gray, a little bit of brown in there, something like that. And we'll be using the knife edge again. Plenty of paint. To just mark out where our little path is going. Out here into off the side of the painting. There. You can add in a couple of brighter highlights here at the front to add some variation. Well, that'll do. So back with the 1-inch filbert, just tap in the remaining area here, leaving some room for the blacks. And always using plenty of paint so you can paint across what's there. There. You can always come back with a little bit of black to touch up the sides or the corners. Okay, that looks just about right. So let's do the same treatment on the other side. Just using the same brush, or sap green, and tap in here on these trees, using plenty of paint. Could maybe even mix in a little bit of our yellow on one of the trees to give it a brighter touch. But basically you're just tapping in these leaves here. And coming down here to our little island, maybe let's put a bit of a bush here in bright red color just to mix things up a bit. And just calm down this entire side here. Try to vary your colors a little bit, but not too much. It will automatically be picking up color from the background. You can always touch up what you've done with a little bit of black just to use negative space to create more detail. Okay, so a final touch here will be using our blender brush to pull down some reflections. Gently do it vertically, pulling down these edges here. And then we can come back with our trick with the clean 1-inch filbert. And pulling some of this water across. Just to make a detailed reflection. And with the palette knife again, we can carve in our shorelines. Remember to use gentle pressure when needed, and a little bit more if you want a cleaner, brighter edge. But in general, be careful here in this stage. You can always undo a mistake and try again. Okay, I think there's one more thing we're going to be adding to this painting, and there's just a couple of small dead trees. So using our rigger brush, which is the really small, thin one, just load up a bit of a brown here. And let's decide, we'll put one right here. And just gently take these lines here. There. And maybe another small one here. That looks about right. We can use just a tap of our 1-inch filbert to settle it in with what's there. And a little bit of extra detailing, which Bob always does, is using our knife edge just to scrape in here some more details, like little stems of the bushes. There. Alright, I'm going to call this one done. All that's left now for you and for me to do is to sign it. Let's take our rigger again and load it full of red paint and go ahead and sign your masterpiece. There, that's us done. I really hope you enjoyed your first painting in Vermillion. Bye bye.